Isabel had worked for the Gutierrez family for almost 15 years. Every day since she had arrived at the mansion, she would rise at dawn to fulfill her duties. The family considered her trustworthy and diligent, but to Isabel, that place was a silent prison. Over the years, she had learned to live with the pain of losing her daughter, Clara, whose whereabouts remained a mystery. Only a small necklace, identical to the one she now always wore, connected her to the last vestige of her daughter. The Gutierrez mansion was a symbol of wealth and power, with endless hallways filled with art and opulent furniture. Every corner of the house had a story, and while the Gutierrez family flaunted their public life, what happened within those walls was filled with secrets. Isabel was witness to many of them, but she had never dared to get involved. Her priority had always been to keep her job and find any clue about Clara's fate. But something changed in her when she found, in Don Julián Gutiérrez's study, a necklace identical to her daughter's. The discovery haunted her for weeks, unable to shake the idea that her daughter and the Gutierrez family were somehow connected. As time went on, Isabel began to investigate more deeply, but she did so cautiously. Every day, while cleaning the house, she observed carefully. She knew that if the Gutierrez family were involved in Clara's disappearance, she would need to tread carefully. The conversations she overheard as she passed by closed doors, the documents she found while cleaning offices, and the whispers of Marina, Don Julián's daughter, while she talked on the phone, everything gave her clues but never a clear answer. One day, while cleaning the study, Isabel decided to check the drawer where she had seen the necklace again. She knew she was taking a risk, but something inside her told her to continue. This time, she found something more, a photograph of a girl, about 10 years old, in a family keepsake box. Looking at it closely, she felt a pang in her heart. That girl, with a melancholic expression, reminded her too much of Clara. Confusion and fear overwhelmed her. Could it be her daughter? But how had that photograph ended up there? Isabel decided she could no longer bear the silence. That same night, when everyone in the house was asleep, she made a call to an old childhood friend, Javier, who worked as a private investigator. It had been years since they last spoke, but Isabel knew he was her only hope for answers. She explained what she had discovered and what she suspected, and Javier promised to investigate the Gutierrez family's past and any possible connection to Clara's disappearance. In the following weeks, Javier informed her that the Gutierrez family had been involved in multiple adoptions over the years, many of them under questionable circumstances. This information alarmed Isabel, as it seemed to confirm her worst fear: her daughter might have been one of the illegally adopted children. However, there was no conclusive proof yet, and they needed to keep digging. Meanwhile, inside the house, Isabel began to notice changes in Marina's behavior. Marina had become more distant, and her comments toward Isabel grew increasingly cryptic. One day, while Marina was dressing for a gala, Isabel, as usual, helped her adjust her dress. "Isabel, have you ever felt like something in your life has been ripped away from you?" Marina asked as she gazed into the mirror. The question unsettled Isabel, but she responded with a tense smile. "Yes, Mississippi. I have felt that." Marina observed her through the mirror, and her eyes reflected something dark. "Imagine something or someone important being taken from you, but you can't do anything to get it back. You can only watch as it slips away." Isabel, trembling, pretended not to understand the insinuation. That conversation left a mark on her mind, and that same night, she decided to share the unsettling talk with Javier. He suggested that she be careful but also saw those words as a possible veiled confession of the family's involvement in Clara's disappearance. Weeks turned into months, and as Isabel continued with her routine, Javier kept investigating. He discovered that the Gutierrez family had a network of contacts abroad, particularly in Europe, where many missing children had been taken and adopted by wealthy families. Javier tracked down a suspicious organization with which the Gutierrez family had worked in the past. As they got closer to the truth, the dangers increased as well. Isabel began to notice strangers around the house, watching her, as if she were being followed. One afternoon, as Isabel was heading home after work, a black car followed her for several blocks. Terrified, she took a detour and ran to a cafe where she knew she could call Javier. He reassured her but also warned her that their discoveries were attracting too much attention. They couldn't stop now, but they needed to be extremely careful. A few days later, Isabel was called to Don Julián's study. The atmosphere was tense, and he looked at her with an intense, impenetrable expression. "Isabel, I've heard rumors. It seems you've been investigating things that don't concern you." Isabel felt her heart pounding in her throat, but she tried to remain calm. "I'm just doing my job, sir. I don't know what you're talking about." Don Julián slowly stood up from his chair, walking toward the window. "I'm warning you, Isabel. Some secrets are better left buried. Stop snooping around, or the consequences will be severe." Isabel, terrified, left the study, but her determination only grew stronger. She knew she was in danger, but she also knew she was closer than ever to uncovering the truth about Clara. One night, while cleaning one of the rarely used guest rooms, Isabel discovered a series of old letters. At first, she thought they were just ordinary correspondence, but when she saw the name, Clara, repeated in several of them, her heart skipped a beat. The letters were addressed to a woman in Europe, thanking her for caring for a girl named Clara. The handwriting seemed to be Marina's, though the letters were unsigned. Isabel couldn't believe what she was reading. Her daughter had been under the care of someone connected to the Gutiérrez family in Europe. She decided to show the letters to Javier, who was now more convinced than ever that Clara was alive and that the Gutiérrez family had been involved in her disappearance. Days turned into endless hours as Isabel and Javier devised a plan to recover Clara. They discovered that the Gutiérrez family had made a deal with an international illegal adoption network and that Clara had been taken to Europe when she was just a child. Isabel, devastated, realized that her daughter had grown up without her, under the control of a corrupt family intent on hiding their crimes. Finally, with the help of international authorities, Javier managed to trace Clara's exact location. She was living in a mansion in France, under a false name, and had no idea of her true origins. Isabel prepared for the most important journey of her life, but she knew that facing the truth would not be easy. When Isabel arrived in France, a mix of excitement and fear welled up inside her. As she approached the mansion where her daughter was living, she felt a knot in her stomach. She knew Clara might not recognize her or even want to see her, but she was willing to take that risk. She rang the doorbell, and a woman opened the door. "Can I help you?" the woman asked in a French accent. "I'm here to see Clara," Isabel replied, her voice trembling. The woman frowned. "There's no one here by that name." Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. She knew the woman was lying but decided not to argue. She simply asked to leave a message. Isabel left the mansion with a heavy heart, but her resolve did not waver. She knew she had come too far to stop now. She returned to her hotel and called Javier to inform him of what had happened. He suggested she not be discouraged, they were clearly hiding Clara, and sooner or later, they would find a way to reach her. That night, Isabel could hardly sleep. She spent hours staring at the photograph of Clara she had kept since she was a child, remembering her laughter, her bright eyes. All the suffering of the past years washed over her in a wave of emotion, but at the same time, a new hope ignited in her heart. She was closer to her daughter than ever. The next morning, Isabel decided to return to the mansion, this time to observe from a safe distance. She wanted to confirm whether Clara was really there. She set herself up in a nearby cafe with a good view of the mansion's entrance. The hours passed slowly, but Isabel kept watch. Finally, after several hours, she saw something that took her breath away. A tall, slender young woman with dark hair walked out of the mansion. Isabel recognized her instantly. It was Clara, her Clara. Though she had grown, her features were unmistakable. Tears welled up in Isabel's eyes, but she held them back. She wanted to run to her, to hug her, and tell her that she was her mother, but she knew she couldn't risk scaring her away. She needed to approach her in a different way, carefully. Isabel decided to follow her, keeping a safe distance. Clara walked through the streets of the city, stopping at a bookstore and then at a small bakery. She seemed to be living a peaceful life, unaware of the storm brewing around her true past. As Isabel followed her, she began to devise a plan. She decided that the best way to connect with Clara would be to strike up contact without immediately revealing her identity. So, the next day, Isabel returned to the same bookstore where she had seen Clara and began frequenting the place, hoping the opportunity to meet would present itself again. Several days passed until, finally, Clara appeared at the bookstore once more. This time, Isabel gathered the courage to approach, pretending to be interested in the same book Clara was browsing. "That's a good book," Isabel said with a smile. "It's one of my favorites." Clara looked up, surprised by the interruption but smiled politely. "Yes, I've heard good things about it," she replied, returning the smile. Isabel seized the opportunity to continue the conversation, talking about literature and art. It was a casual exchange, but for Isabel, it meant so much more. It was the first time in years she had spoken to her daughter, even though Clara had no idea who she was. Over the next few days, Isabel returned to the bookstore often, coincidentally running into Clara on several occasions. Little by little, they began to form a surface-level friendship. However, Isabel knew she couldn't keep her identity a secret for long. As their encounters became more frequent, she felt the moment of truth approaching. But just when she was about to reveal to Clara who she really was, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as Isabel prepared to meet Clara again at the bookstore, Javier called her with an urgent warning. He informed her that the human trafficking network the Gutierrez family had been involved with had discovered that Isabel was in France searching for her daughter. They knew Isabel was close to uncovering the whole truth, and they were taking steps to stop her from gathering the evidence she needed. Isabel realized that not only her life but also Clara's was now in danger. The Gutierrez family would not let their secrets come to light so easily. She decided she couldn't wait any longer. She had to get Clara out of that environment before it was too late. That night, Isabel intercepted Clara as she was leaving the bookstore and asked her to join her for coffee. Clara accepted, though a bit puzzled by Isabel's insistence. Once they were seated in a secluded corner of the cafe, Isabel took a deep breath and decided it was time to tell her the truth. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you. This won't be easy to understand, but I need you to listen." Clara looked at her with curiosity but also apprehension. "What's going on?" she asked. With trembling hands, Isabel took out the small necklace she wore around her neck and showed it to Clara. "This necklace is the same as the one you're wearing. I know because I gave it to you when you were a child. I am your mother, Clara." Clara's face instantly went pale. She stared at Isabel as if she couldn't comprehend what she was hearing. "What are you saying? That's impossible. My mother is at home, at the mansion. You're not." Her voice broke. Isabel knew it would be difficult for Clara to accept the truth. It was devastating for anyone to discover that their whole life had been a lie. "I know it's hard to believe, but you have to listen to me. You were taken from me when you were little. The family you've been living with is not your real family. They're involved in very dark things, Clara. Things you can't even imagine." Clara shook her head, in shock. "No, it can't be. They raised me. They love me." Her voice was barely a whisper, full of confusion. Isabel tried to stay calm, but every word she spoke brought her closer to the truth she had been searching for all these years. "They took you from me. For years, I've been looking for answers, trying to find you. It wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't give up. Now I'm here, Clara. I'm here to bring you back, so we can be a family again." Clara stood up, visibly shaken. "This is madness. I can't. I can't believe this. I need time. I need to think. Isabel didn't push her any further. She knew she had planted a seed of doubt in Clara's mind and that she would need time to process everything she had just heard. Take your time, Isabel said softly. But please, don't walk away. I'll be here when you're ready to know more. Clara left the cafe without another word, leaving Isabel sitting at the table, heartbroken but hopeful. She knew she had taken an important step, even though the road to reconciliation with her daughter would be long and difficult. For the following days, Clara didn't contact Isabel. The agony of not knowing what was going through her daughter's mind was almost unbearable. But Isabel knew she had to be patient. She had waited years for this moment, and a little more time wouldn't stop her now. Finally, a week after their meeting at the cafe, Clara appeared at the door of the hotel where Isabel was staying. Her face was full of tears, and she threw herself into Isabel's arms. Is it true? She asked between sobs. Is it true that you're my mother? Isabel hugged her tightly, feeling as if all the pain and suffering of the last years were finally coming to an end. Yes, my love. I'm your mother, and I'm here for you. Isabel embraced Clara with a mixture of relief and sadness. She felt as though she had gotten her daughter back, but at the same time, the scars of the past were still deep. The distance that time had placed between them wouldn't disappear overnight. She knew they still had a lot of healing to do, and they would need to confront the years of separation and suffering both had endured. Clara slowly pulled away from Isabel and sat beside her on the small sofa in the hotel room, her gaze fixed on the floor. After a few minutes of silence, she began to speak. I always felt like something wasn't right, she confessed quietly. I grew up with them, believing they were my family, but I never felt truly connected. It was like there was an invisible distance between us, like I didn't belong there. They treated me well, sure, they gave me everything I needed, but I never felt completely loved. Isabel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Hearing her daughter's words was like reliving her own feelings of anguish during all those years. Clara had grown up with a family that wasn't hers, a family that could never give her the genuine love of a mother. I felt the same way, Clara, Isabel responded, her voice full of emotion. I felt like something inside me had been ripped out the day they took you. I searched for you for so long. I never stopped thinking about you, not for a single day. I wondered how you were, if you were happy, if you were okay. But I was also afraid. Afraid that you had forgotten who I was or that they had convinced you I didn't love you. Clara looked at her mother with deep sadness. I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know that a part of my life had been stolen from me. Sometimes, at night, I would wake up with a strange feeling in my chest, like something was missing. But I didn't know what it was. Now I realize it was you. All this time, I was searching for something, without knowing what it was. Isabel took Clara's hand, trying to convey all the love and comfort she had accumulated over the years of separation. When you were little, before they took you, I always told you that we were inseparable, Isabel said, her voice trembling. No matter what happened, we would always be together. And even though we weren't physically together, I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped fighting to find you. Clara nodded, trying to process everything her mother was telling her. Isabel knew it wouldn't be easy for her daughter to understand the full extent of what had been stolen from her. Time, lies, and distance had built a barrier that would be hard to break. There were moments when I felt completely alone, even when I was surrounded by people, Clara continued. The Gutierrez family gave me everything material, but there was always a coldness in them, something I never understood. Now I see that they just weren't my real parents. I never felt that bond, that unconditional love that should have been there. Isabel remembered the countless days and nights when she had cried for her daughter. She remembered how she had tried, over and over, to find clues about her whereabouts, only to be met with closed doors. She often wondered if she would ever see Clara again, if her little girl was alive, happy, or even if she would remember her. The worst, Isabel said, as the memories overwhelmed her, was not knowing. Every day, I wondered if you were okay, if they were treating you kindly. And when the clues led nowhere, I felt so powerless, so broken. But I couldn't give up. I had to keep searching for you. Clara looked at her mother with a newfound understanding. She was beginning to see how deep her mother's suffering had been, how desperate she had been to find her. I had questions too, Clara said, her voice filled with emotion. I remember asking them about my origins, about why I didn't have memories of when I was younger. They told me I had an accident, that it had affected my memory. But I always felt like they were hiding something. They never gave me details, they always evaded my questions. Isabel squeezed her daughter's hands tightly. They lied to you, Clara. They took you from me in such a cruel way. But now that we know, now that we're together again, we can start healing. We may not be able to get back the time we lost, but we can build something new, something better. The pain of the past wouldn't disappear overnight, but both knew they had the opportunity to start anew. Isabel realized there were more things her daughter needed to know, but she decided to give her the time she needed to process everything. It wasn't the time to rush the revelations. Instead of pushing the conversation further, Isabel suggested they go for a walk around the city. Clara agreed, and they strolled through the streets of Paris, where the bustling day provided a temporary distraction from their worries. As they walked, Isabel began to tell Clara stories about her childhood, of the happy moments they had shared before they were separated. She spoke of afternoons in the park, birthdays they had celebrated together, and the promises she had made to always be there for her. Clara listened attentively, each detail filling in the gaps in her memory. She began to recall small things, the melody of a song her mother used to sing to her, the touch of her hand when helping her cross the street. As the pieces started to fall into place, Clara realized how much had been stolen from her, but also how fortunate she was to have found her true mother again. Now that I know the truth, I want to know more, Clara said. I want you to tell me everything that happened after they took me. I need to understand why all of this happened, why they kept me away from you for so many years. Isabel nodded, understanding her daughter's desire to know every detail. As they continued their conversation, Isabel told her about the failed attempts by the police, the false leads she had followed, and the countless times she had almost given up. She also spoke of the people who had supported her in her search, of friends and family who had never stopped believing that one day she would find Clara. But she also revealed the worst, the moments of absolute despair when it seemed that everything was lost, when she faced the cruel possibility that she might never see her daughter again. Those were the darkest days of her life when she felt like the world was collapsing around her. I never stopped believing in you, Clara, Isabel assured her. I always knew, deep down, that I would find you. And although the pain was immense, hope is what kept me alive. With tears in her eyes, Clara hugged her mother once more. Isabel was overwhelmed with a mix of pain and anger as she thought about the Gutierrez family, who had manipulated and mistreated her daughter for so many years. While Clara had never experienced extreme physical violence, the emotional and psychological abuse she had suffered at the hands of this family was undeniable. Clara, there's something else I need to tell you, Isabel said, her voice trembling slightly. I know they treated you as if you were one of their own, but the things they did, the things I found out during my search. They were cruel. Not only did they take you away from me, but they deliberately lied to you, manipulated you. It was all part of their plan to make sure you never found me. Clara looked at her in surprise. She hadn't fully understood the darker aspects of her life with the Gutierrez family until now. But as she listened to her mother, memories began to resurface with a new clarity. I remember, strange things, Mom. Moments when they made me feel like I wasn't enough. They always compared me to their own children, telling me I'd never be as smart or as talented as them. They made me feel like I owed them my life, like they had saved me from something terrible and I should be forever grateful. Isabel nodded sadly. That was their tactic. They wanted you to feel inferior, to make you believe you owed them everything. They knew that if they kept you in that state of emotional dependency, you'd never dare to search for me. I discovered that everything was planned from the beginning. It wasn't an accident that you ended up living with them, it was an agreement between them and powerful people who wanted to make sure I never saw you again. Clara remembered the disapproving looks from Señora Gutiérrez, the way she constantly watched her, as if always expecting her to make a mistake. The small punishments Clara had suffered were subtle but cruel, being denied access to her belongings, made to feel guilty for minor mishaps, and ignored for days when her behavior displeased them. They made me feel like I didn't belong, Clara said, her voice tight with emotion. They always reminded me how lucky I was to have been adopted, but it never felt like a real adoption. It was as if they kept me there out of convenience, but they never saw me as their child. Isabel felt a rising sense of anger toward the family that had mistreated and manipulated her daughter for so long. They were cruel, Clara, Isabel said firmly. Not only did they manipulate you, but they played with your mind, made you believe you weren't good enough, that you were less than they were. But you were always strong. Despite everything they did, you never broke. That's what gives me hope now, that we can overcome this together. Clara remembered another incident that had caused her deep pain. When she was 10 years old, Señora Gutiérrez had organized a birthday party for her son, Tomás. Although Clara had been invited, she was given the task of serving food and cleaning up afterward. She wasn't allowed to participate as a regular guest, and when she tried to complain, Señora Gutiérrez had coldly told her, "You should be grateful just to attend." It was always like that, Clara said, lost in the memory. They made me feel inferior, like I didn't deserve the things they had. They gave me the bare minimum to keep me from complaining, but they never let me forget it. Even at Christmas, I'd always get the cheapest, most meaningless gifts while they flaunted their expensive ones. Isabel felt powerless, knowing she couldn't erase the pain of Clara's past, but she could offer her the hope of a new life, a chance to heal and be happy. What they did is unforgivable, Clara, Isabel said, her face hardening. But now you're with me. We're going to build something better, something they can never destroy. We won't let what they did continue to have power over you. You're stronger than they are, and you've proven that by surviving all of this. Clara nodded slowly. While the scars of her childhood still hurt, she felt a renewed sense of hope in her heart. Now that she knew the truth, she could start to heal and free herself from the emotional control the Gutiérrez family had exercised over her for so many years. As the days passed, Clara and Isabel began exploring ways to confront their pain. They talked in more detail about the horrors Clara had experienced in the Gutiérrez house, from the insults to the humiliations. Isabel promised her that they would do everything in their power to sue the family, seeking justice for what had been done and ensuring that no one else would suffer the same fate. In this process, Isabel also shared more about her own traumas. She told Clara about the countless times the authorities had ignored her, the investigators who had abandoned her, and the friends who had turned their backs when all seemed lost. She confessed that, on more than one occasion, she had thought about giving up, but something in her heart always told her that her daughter was still alive, waiting to be found. Isabel also spoke of the support she had received from a few people who, while unable to provide answers, gave her the encouragement she needed to keep going. Clara listened intently, realizing just how parallel their lives had been, both enduring years of pain and disappointment, never knowing that one day they would be reunited. As the two women began to heal their wounds, the shadow of the Gutiérrez family began to fade, though the marks they had left on Clara would never completely disappear. Isabel was filled with a sense of helplessness. She knew she couldn't erase Clara's painful past, but she could offer her the comfort of a new life, a fresh start to heal and find happiness. What they did to you was unforgivable, Clara, Isabel said, her voice firm. But now you're with me. We're going to build something better, something they can never take away from you. We won't let their actions keep controlling you. You're stronger than them, and you've shown that by surviving this. Clara nodded slowly. Though the scars from her childhood still hurt, there was a growing sense of hope in her heart. Now that she knew the truth, she could begin to heal, freeing herself from the emotional grip the Gutierrez family had held over her for so many years. As the days passed, Clara and Isabel delved deeper into discussions about the horrors Clara had endured in the Gutierrez house. Isabel promised Clara they would do everything possible to hold the family accountable, taking legal action to ensure justice for what Clara had suffered and to prevent them from harming others. Throughout this process, Isabel also opened up about her own traumatic experiences. She told Clara about how the authorities had dismissed her, about the investigators who had abandoned her search, and about the friends who had turned away when all hope seemed lost. Isabel admitted that, more than once, she had thought about giving up, but something deep within her had always told her that Clara was still alive, waiting to be found. Clara listened closely, recognizing the parallels in their lives. Both had spent years in pain and disappointment, not knowing that one day they would reunite. They talked about the emotional wounds they still carried, and both found comfort in the fact that they were no longer alone. As Clara and Isabel began to heal, the lingering shadow of the Gutierrez family began to fade, though the scars left on Clara by her past would never fully disappear. But one day, something unexpected happened. Javier, the private investigator who had been helping Isabel all this time, appeared at their door. He hadn't visited since Isabel had traveled to France to find Clara, and his sudden arrival stirred mixed emotions in both women. Clara recognized him immediately. He had been a regular visitor at the Gutierrez mansion for years. He always seemed kind and respectful, but now, knowing the truth, she felt a wave of unease. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked sharply, her voice tense. Javier raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I didn't come to cause any trouble, Clara. I need to talk to both you and your mother. There's something I've been holding on to for too long, something you both need to know." Isabel, who had been in the kitchen, emerged with a curious but cautious look on her face. She knew Javier had played a critical role in their journey, but she was still wary. His involvement with the Gutierrez family made her suspicious. "Go ahead," Isabel said, crossing her arms. "But let me warn you, if you're here to defend that family or try to manipulate us, you won't like the outcome." Javier sighed deeply, his face lined with exhaustion and, unexpectedly, regret. "I understand, Isabel. Believe me, I'm not here to defend them. Quite the opposite. I've come to apologize and to help you finally put this dark chapter behind you." Clara and Isabel exchanged glances, unsure of what to make of his words. "I was part of everything that happened with the Gutierrez family," Javier began, "but not in the way you might think. At first, I worked as their lawyer, handling their legal affairs. But when I realized what they were doing to Clara, the manipulation, the emotional abuse, it was already too late. I felt trapped. If I had tried to help her directly or walk away from them, they would have ruined me professionally. And they would have made Clara's life even worse." Silence filled the room as Javier's confession sank in. His words hung heavy in the air, filled with a truth that neither Isabel nor Clara were sure they wanted to hear. "Why are you here now?" Clara asked, her tone softer but still tinged with suspicion. Javier exhaled deeply, putting his hands in his pockets as if to steady himself. "Because I can't live with the guilt anymore. I spent years watching as they slowly destroyed you, and I did nothing. Yes, I was scared, but I also let myself be influenced by their power and promises. I knew that as long as I did what they wanted, I would stay safe and protected. But I can't do it any longer. I can't keep hiding what they did." Clara felt a surge of anger and confusion, but Isabel, who had always been more pragmatic, saw an opportunity in Javier's words. "So, what are you offering us?" Isabel asked. "How do you plan to help us now, after all this time?" "I want to testify against them," Javier said, determination in his voice. "I've gathered information over the years. It's not just about what they did to Clara. The Gutierrez family is involved in even darker things than you think. They have illegal businesses, connections with people who prefer to stay hidden. I can expose it all, but I need your help. I need you to be willing to speak out too. Clara and Isabel looked at each other, still processing the magnitude of what Javier was revealing. What kinds of things? Clara asked, a mix of distrust and curiosity in her voice. Javier approached the table, pulling out a thick envelope filled with documents. He placed it in front of them and began to explain. The Gutierrez family didn't just take you from your mother. They've been involved in influence peddling, bribery, and money laundering for years. But the worst part is that they've been part of a child trafficking ring. I don't know if they were planning something else with you, Clara, but I do know that you were part of a much larger scheme. You were lucky to escape, but not all the children who passed through their hands were so fortunate. The horror on Clara and Isabel's faces was unmistakable. While they had suspected the Gutierrez family of many things, they had never imagined something so monstrous. How can we trust you? Isabel asked, still on guard. How do we know this isn't just a way for you to save yourself? Javier looked at her sincerely. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm only offering you a way out, a path to justice. I know what I did was wrong, but if I testify and give you the evidence I've gathered, we could bring down their entire network. We could make sure they never hurt anyone else again. Clara, still reeling from the enormity of the revelation, looked at her mother for guidance. Mom, I don't know what to think. This is so much bigger than I imagined. Isabel, her face set with determination, turned to Javier. If you really have the evidence you claim, we'll do whatever it takes to make them pay for what they did. But if this is just a ploy to save your own skin. It's not, Javier interrupted, his voice serious. You have my word, and beyond that, you have the evidence. I'm willing to put myself on the line if it means you get the justice you deserve. The tension in the room was thick, but it was filled with the possibility of real change. Javier, once a passive accomplice to the Gutierrez family, now presented an opportunity for Clara and Isabel to finally close the darkest chapter of their lives. Then we'll do it, Clara said at last, her voice filled with a mix of fear and determination. I don't know how, but we'll do it. We can't let them keep hurting people. Javier nodded, grateful and, for the first time in years, relieved. In the months that followed, Javier worked tirelessly with Isabel and Clara to gather the necessary evidence. The investigation expanded nationwide, and over time, the Gutierrez family was exposed in both the media and the courts. It was a long and painful process, but eventually, Clara and Isabel watched as those responsible for their years of suffering were brought to justice. On the day the verdict was announced, Clara felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Javier, in his own way, had been instrumental in that process. While he would never be a close friend, he had helped dismantle the dark empire that had nearly destroyed them. Isabel and Clara, after so many years of pain, were finally able to begin rebuilding their lives. Though the scars of the past would never completely fade, they knew they were on a path toward a fuller, freer life, together, as mother and daughter, with a future filled with possibilities. End of the story.